I've always dabbled in art throughout my life, with drawing, sketching, always very interested in art, all the arts, dancing and music. I am a musician also. So I grew up in Swampscott, Massachusetts, by the ocean, so you'll see that there are some seascapes and things related to that. The ocean is something that is very important to me, really grounds me, and all of my friends that grew up in the same community feel the same way about the ocean and the beach. As far as my first career, I became an RN, a nurse. I was interested in doing the arts, but my father said, no daughter of mine is going to be a starving artist. So you have to figure out something else in order to be able to support yourself. So I thought maybe teaching. I thought maybe, I'm interested in the sciences. I think I would rather do that. So I went into nursing. So I got my bachelor's degree from UMass Lowell, which at the time was Lowell State College. I was in their very first nursing class to graduate, and worked for about 7 years doing obstetrics, maternity care, neonatal care, newborns, and labor and delivery. I eventually got involved in painting, and as I said, I've always dabbled all my life. But I started off painting with a group of friends that I knew in Holden, Massachusetts at their senior center. And I remember my very first painting was a great blue heron, which I don't have in this exhibit, but I've done many great blue herons, watercolors, and they're a bird that I just really enjoy, and they kind of remind me of polydactyls, some of the dinosaurs. Which incidentally, the great blue heron was in trouble in the 60s because of DDT, as was bald eagle and ospreys because of the thinning of the shells that chemical caused. And it was the great writer Rachel Carson that published an article in the New Yorker that captured the attention of John F. Kennedy. And he had her testify before Congress about the peril that these birds were in. And he was particularly interested because of the great bald eagle. And Massachusetts lost their great bald eagles. They were almost extinct here in this state. And there was a reintroduction program that was done, and I know one of the people that participated in that program as far as raising the babies to the point where they finally fledged. So that program was very, very successful in Massachusetts, and we have many pairs of great bald eagles now. But we have to be careful because there are pesticides that are very dangerous. So I became interested probably back then when I heard about Rachel Carson in what causes animals to become either threatened, vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered or extinct. And I was very concerned because there are many different species of animals that I really, really like. And it's very hard for me to say what is a favorite. But I would have to say that one of my favorites is the humpback whale. And why, you may ask, is the humpback whale my favorite? Because in July 4th, 1983, I went on a whale watch out of Salem, Massachusetts, with my brother and my 2 nieces and nephew. And this excursion took us out to Stellwagen Bank. And at the time, the whales were known to be endangered. And so we went out to Stellwagen Bank, and there really wasn't anything too exciting going on. But then the naturalist saw a breaching whale in the distance. So we went right for that whale. And I will tell you, it was like it was giving us the performance of our lives. It was amazing. It just breached and breached and breached. The kids really thought that this was the normal whale watch. Believe me, it wasn't, because I went on other whale watches and it wasn't nearly as impressive as that one. So I became very interested in marine life, which is a natural because I grew up by the ocean. But I also became concerned about other animals in Africa, such as African elephants and cheetahs and lions. You know, everybody thinks these animals aren't in any kind of danger, but they are. Pangolins. Pangolins are basically scaly anteaters. They're not the same as anteaters, but they have these very sharp scales on their bodies. And if a predator is threatening them, they roll up in a ball, and they protect their bellies, and these scales help protect them because they're very sharp and razor-like. And many people don't even know about pangolins. They are in Asia and Africa, and there are about 8 different species of pangolins. The problem is that they are captured and killed for their scales because they're used in some of the Asian folk medicine. The problem is that then the Asians said, gee, it's too bad that we're wasting this animal. So then they started eating the meat, and they liked it, so it now became a delicacy. So these animals are imperiled. And I became entranced with pangolins because I had seen a documentary on Channel 2 about a researcher that was working with pangolins and how she went to Vietnam to study the pangolins there, and she was based in Africa, and what could they do to save these animals. As far as this panel here, I have wild cats. The snow leopard is from the Himalayas, and this is a very endangered animal, as is the Sumatran tiger, which is critically endangered. Sumatra is a place where it's part of Indonesia, and they have mowed down a lot of their forest land for palm plantations for profit. So consequently, the common denominator with all these animals and plants is human activity. Human activity that disrupts the land, that takes the land away from the animals so that they have no habitat, and so they're at risk of dying out. In this panel here, there is an Iberian lynx that is from Spain, and that was on the brink of extinction, and Spain got a breeding program going with this particular animal and have been reasonably successful. And they featured an article in the National Geographic about the Iberian lynx and how they're working to bring that species back. I think most people are familiar with the African elephant with the large ears, because they need the large ears in order to cool themselves off. In addition to that, they're primarily killed for their tusks. And they have very large brains. They're very intelligent animals. They mourn for their loved ones the way humans do. So there are many, many qualities that you see in some of these animals that you would also see in human behavior. The most endangered, critically endangered animal is the Amur leopard. The main issue here for this leopard is habitat loss, because they're deforesting grounds so that they have no place to hide. They need the vegetation in order to be able to be protected from predators, and they need to have that to rear their young. So it's really troubling about these different species. These 2 paintings, the Sumatran tiger and the snow leopard, are done in acrylic paint, and it's done in a lot of layers to get the brilliance of color. I seal every single one of my acrylic paintings with what we call an isolation coat that keeps the paint stable. And then I do several layers of varnish that helps cut down on ultraviolet light damage. So, these are very well sealed works. The watercolors are much more perishable if they get wet, because then everything will get blurred. So these 2 are strictly watercolors, the African elephant and the Amur leopard. The Iberian lynx has also some colored pencil work in there as well, because I really wanted to get the texture of the fur right. So I like to do mixed media when it suits me to do it. I have a baby endangered green sea turtle. Green sea turtles are highly endangered species. They primarily reside in tropical islands or tropical waters. This particular turtle was in a position that reminded me of a ballet dancer. So I decided I was going to put a tutu on the turtle. You know, I thought it would be kind of fun, so that's what I decided to do. This one is another acrylic painting of a monarch butterfly and a painted lady. Monarch butterflies have recently been classified as endangered, and that's because of pesticides that are being used in the United States that kill these beautiful creatures. In addition, there isn't enough milkweed, which is where they lay their eggs, and they feed on milkweed as caterpillars in their larval stage. The painted lady is protected. It's not endangered, and they're very abundant, but their range is all the way from Morocco to the United States up to the Arctic, if you can believe that. It's pretty wide. But they're a really beautiful butterfly. And these are very, very important in terms of being pollinators. Agriculture relies on pollinators, such as butterflies and bees. If we don't have pollinators, we're not going to have food. So it's a really important thing. Down here is a watercolor of a pangolin, and you get the sense of the scaliness of the creature. They're very shy animals. They tend to be solitary, and they live in burrows. And the only time that they are not solitary is when they mate. But otherwise, they're solitary. This is the African cheetah with some cubs. This species is vulnerable and trending towards being endangered. Very worrisome. Again, it relates to habitat, and it relates to the fact that they want to kill these animals for their fur. The polar bear is another watercolor with cubs, and I don't think it's any secret that their habitat has become very perilous for them because you have all the glaciers melting. So they have no sea ice in which they can do their hunting for seals, their primary staple for food. Because the sea ice is melting, the cubs, when they migrate to the far north of Alaska in the Arctic area, the journey sometimes is too much for the cubs. They don't have enough stamina. And so many times the cubs will drown. And if you're losing the babies, then that's going to hasten the process of becoming endangered and possibly extinct. The New England cottontail, this is a fun painting that I did because I actually saw these two animals, a New England cottontail and a chipmunk, playing together on a stone wall in my neighborhood. So I painted this painting, and in doing my research, I found out that New England cottontails are vulnerable. And that has to do, again, with loss of habitat. The plant life has changed, the composition, and there's been a disappearance of thickets, which these animals like to reside in. Chipmunks are not endangered. They're very abundant, as a matter of fact. This is a painting that I did in acrylic. This painting is done in acrylic, and it is a dragonfly on a lace cap hydrangea in my yard. The dragonfly is threatened. Why would you think that it's threatened? Well, it's threatened because swamplands and other places that they breed are being filled in for development. So it's, again, a loss of habitat and human activity. And dragonflies eat a lot of the pesky critters like mosquitoes and the things that we don't like to encounter. Okay, I already mentioned the protected breaching humpback whale. It's not endangered at this point, but the right whale definitely is. They have maybe only about 200 or 300 right whales in existence. The Antarctic emperor penguin with chicks, they're considered threatened. And again, it has to do with the melting of the glaciers in the Antarctic and potential loss of habitat and warming of the water. This impacts what their food supply is going to be and what kind of plankton is available for their feeding. And this is an acrylic. Over here I have the osprey with very hungry chicks. The thing that I think is extremely interesting about the osprey is their nests are incredibly huge. Very, very huge, complicated nests. I've seen these birds in Rhode Island, and I've seen them down on the Cape, and I've seen them around Massachusetts as well. And these were one of the species that was pushed to the brink because of DDT. The weight of the bird on the eggs, because the eggs had a thin shell, caused the eggs to break. Down here we have a sharp-shinned hawk, which is of special concern. It's not yet endangered, but they're concerned that they're seeing declining numbers of these birds. And these two birds are in the classification of raptors, and raptors are extremely important in that they keep the rodent population in check. So if we lose raptors, we're going to be in trouble. Owls also are in that classification. Continuing with raptors. Now, we've got a very angry mama great horned owls with her chicks. Great horned owls are wonderful animals and are wonderful to observe. But be very careful, because if you provoke them, especially if there are chicks involved, you could very well get hooked by their talons. And there are people that have done that. So here are her two chicks, and she's up in a pine tree. That's usually one of the favorite places for them to hang out, or one of the evergreens. This is a barred owl, and the call on a barred owl is, "Who cooks for you?" So that's one of the distinguishing calls. They don't all go hoot, 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 or ooh, ooh, ooh. They all have different calls. So a friend of mine actually photographed this owl, and it was a very interesting picture to look at because of all the lichen on the trees and other details, you know, the birch. So with her permission, I did use her photograph for the basis of the painting. And then the same thing with this one. This snowy owl was from Salisbury Reservation. And again, this is my friend Roberta, who shot the picture that this painting is based on. And it was right over the ocean. So already I was sold because it was on the ocean. And if you look very closely at the painting, you can see the seaweed on the rocks and some of the other details. And there was a snowy owl that I photographed up in Salisbury Reservation a few years ago. And Roberta told me that owl died. And I said, well, gee, do you know why? And she says, no, but when I know, I'll tell you. Well, it seems that somebody had a bait trap on their property with poison for mice and rats. And so they had eaten some of the poison, and the snowy owl ate the rat or the mouse and succumbed because of the poison. So be very careful, because there's a whole chain reaction that's set off, because these rodents are prey for other animals. And I know rodents are a real big nuisance for us, but they're also the food for these animals. And raptors keep them in check. This great blue heron has 3 chicks in her nest. And this is based on a photograph that was taken in Georgetown, Massachusetts, where there is a heron rookery. And the courtship process between the herons is very interesting. First of all, these birds are not monogamous. They will be involved for a season, and then they move on to a different bird. The way it starts off is that the male bird offers the female bird an offering of a branch or a twig for their nest. And they build the nest together. And if she accepts the twig from the male, then she mates with him. And so it's a very elaborate nest. I was wondering how I was going to manage to paint it, but it just kind of fell into place. That's the mama with the 3 chicks. And then this is also acrylic. This painting is a great blue heron flying over a tidal pool. And notice the reflection of the bird in the water. Very interesting. This is another great blue heron. I did this based on a picture that I took at Webster Lake. I call this one Reflections, and this is mixed media. This is primarily watercolor, but there's also some colored pencil detail because I couldn't get the gravelly texture of the sandy beach there. And then you can see the reflection of the heron into the water. So the base is watercolor, but it's with accents with colored pencil. This bottom one is a Canada goose, and these birds are very interesting when they bathe. They flap their wings all over the place and they kind of dive in the water, and they need to keep their feathers clean and well preened because if they don't, they're going to have problems with flying. So I had caught this bird bathing and shot the picture that was the basis of this. And I had a lot of fun doing that. My watercolor teacher said to me, "You're really going to do that?" Yeah. And I said, "Yeah, why not?" And he says, "I wouldn't do that." Yeah. And I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to try, and you can tell me if it's a dud." He didn't think it was a dud. This painting has a very big story attached to it, and I don't have enough time to tell you the whole story. But in the spring of 2018, I followed a family of swans. And I became connected with the parents as they were nesting. And the father, the cob, checked me out very carefully. He wanted to make sure I wasn't a threat. So anyway, we developed, if it's possible, a friendship. And they allowed me very close proximity to their babies. Well, this is their 3 cygnets that were surviving. They started off with 5. I captured this picture when they were on a sandy beach that was by a deserted house. I remember I walked in there and there were briars and everything. And the parents came eagerly up to me and I said, "Where are the kids? Where are they?" And they turned their heads. And through the grasses I could see them. And I said, "Is it okay if I go over and say hi to them?" And they did nothing. They said, "Sure." So off I went and I shot some pictures of their babies together. So cygnets start off with brown feathers, and they don't turn into the white feathering until they're nearly a year age, and they don't get the traditional orange beak until they're a full year. So in the following December, when I saw the cygnet, I saw a lot of swans around, but I could tell which ones were cygnets and which one were mature because the cygnets' bills remained a brownish gray, whereas the adults were a bright orange. So I could tell, even though the plumage was primarily white at that point, with some of the brown overtone, I could tell which ones were not mature and which ones were. So this was a fun project for me. I went down and saw them probably anywhere from a week to every 2 weeks until they fledged. And the fledging was just absolutely amazing. And I have information up here about the Migratory Bird Act, and I think this is important for people to understand. This was a treaty that was done in 1918 to protect birds. I highlighted this here because this is important. According to studies, power lines kill up to 64 million birds a year. Communication towers are estimated to kill up to 7 million birds per year. And uncovered oil waste pits account for up to another 500,000 to 1 million bird deaths every year. Data on wind turbines are harder to come by, but current estimates are approximately 234,000 bird deaths per year. And what's happening is they're seeing declines in bird populations because of these environmental hazards. So I want to particularly mention the wood ducks here. This is pastel. This has some acrylic accents, but it's primarily pastel. This is a wood duck, and this is another wood duck, which is all pastel. And pastel is a little bit different to work with. You have to use fixative to get it to stay on the paper. But I really enjoyed doing these two particular. They're such beautiful ducks when you see them in the wild with all the colors. They're just gorgeous. But they nearly became extinct. This is a family of mallards with their 5 ducklings, and this is on Webster Lake. This is a watercolor of a chickadee in an evergreen tree, and I particularly like chickadees. They're very sweet. And this one was aware that I was there and sort of let me continue photographing. And they are the Massachusetts state bird. I wanted to mention that. So all of these birds are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act from 1918, which was updated in the 2000s. I don't remember the year. In this painting, people will look at it and they'll say, did the bird really do that? Yeah, this was in my front yard. I had sunflowers, and this is, it's a goldfinch. And this bird was upside down on the flower and mushed its face right into the face of the flower and was just feasting on all those seeds. So this is all watercolor. So this panel has primarily endangered animals. This is an acrylic painting that is the endangered Iriomote cat from Japan. Very endangered animal. And the main problem is that these cats get hit by cars and tourists that come to the island to visit. So their numbers have dramatically decreased. The black-footed ferret in the United States and the Midwest is endangered. They were getting infected by an organism that was affecting prairie dogs. Their main dietary staple is prairie dogs. But they've been doing a lot of work to vaccinate them against this agent that causes infection in them, and they're starting to rebound. That's a watercolor. This painting here is a clouded leopard. And clouded leopards, they're in China, Sumatra, and Nepal, and Borneo. And the main issue for them, besides loss of habitat, is humans want their fur for rugs and coats. Okay, so it's an absolutely exquisite big cat. That's a watercolor. Underneath it is a koala bear and her cub, and that was a painting that I did at the time of the Australian fires. And these animals have become endangered in Australia. The problem with the fires is that eucalyptus has a lot of eucalyptus oil, which is highly flammable, so when those wildfires get started, they just really decimated the landscape and killed a lot of koalas. This is the endangered sandcat, and they primarily live in Africa in the desert. That's their habitat. They're about the size of a domestic cat, but they're definitely not domestic cats. They're wild. This is a watercolor, and the paint above that is the endangered lady slipper. The lady slipper was just classified as endangered this year. And you might say, well, why is that? Well, because developers come in, they bulldoze the land, they develop it, and the problem is lady slippers like to be underneath pine trees and forested areas. So they cut down all the forests, they bulldoze the land, and when they bulldoze the land, they are bulldozing the lady slippers. So we don't see as many lady slippers in Massachusetts as we once saw. And there are some other species of lady slippers that are even more endangered than what's here. Well, I just love these animals and plants. And I think that they're part of ecosystems that help sustain our planet. And if you eliminate any species because you decide that you don't like them, that spells disaster, because then there'll be something else that becomes a problem in overpopulation. So, you know, there's a system of checks and balances everywhere. And, you know, it's like what's happening out in the West related to the wolf. Again, the wolves have a purpose, and I don't really think that they are guilty of all the things that they claim out there. I mean, I'm not living there, so I can't say for sure, but to just eliminate a species is not wise. I am working on a painting that I have planned up in my head of orangutan. And what's amazing about orangutans is the way they interact with their babies is very similar to what you see with humans. Very, very interesting animals. Again, they're in Borneo, and they're losing habitat. They need to have a tree canopy in order to survive. They're up in the tree canopy. They give birth to their babies in the tree canopy. Working in labor and delivery, I couldn't imagine delivering a human up in a tree canopy. Are you kidding me? You know, they're just fascinating animals. And I plan on painting more butterflies, and, you know, I'm interested in manta rays and, you know, all kinds of things. All kinds of ideas, but just not enough time to execute them all.
So thank you, Anne, for sharing your work with us.
Well, thank you.
And we are open Mondays and Thursdays, 9 a.m. until 8 p.m. And Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 to 5. And Saturdays now, 9 until 1 p.m.